Okay, Yvonne, we are live. Right. So thank you ever so much for coming to join us. If you're watching us live, I'm here with Yvonne. And Yvonne, would you like to just introduce yourself for us, please?
Yeah, I'm the founder of Change Innovators. I always refer to myself as kind of the old lady on the team. I started the company 24 years ago.
Yeah, and we've been, I suppose I should say, my name's Lee Norris. I work with Change Innovators and one of the directors in the UK, and also work really closely with our colleagues in Canada where the company was founded. And we are really happy to be here. Yvonne and I have been planning this for a long time, and we're calling it the Founders Series. And it sits alongside a couple of other video blogs that we've been creating. But this one, I think, is really, really special and important. And we're going to get right into it. Okay. So we're calling this episode 1 because we definitely plan to do some more of these. And we're going to kick the series off by looking at the stories. And we've called it The Stories Behind the Story. So, Yvonne, over to you. Where would you like to start your story?
Well, I do think that the story behind the story is really important. And I think because other people feel this and they see it in their workplaces, and not to the extent that I would have seen it 25 years ago. But I'm going to try to give the Coles notes. But basically, I was in the corporate world for a long time, over 20 years. And I was a late bloomer starting the business. So I was well into my 40s when I started the business, almost 50. No, in my 40s. And because that would make me like 80, and I know I'm not. But what I can say is that I moved up and moved up and moved up. So I was working in the international transportation industry. I was very male-dominated industry. I was the only woman at the table. And I'd had a lot of experiences, but I want to share one experience, which was really the catalyst to starting Change Innovators. I had gotten this fabulous job as the branch manager of a fairly large operation. So we're talking big warehouse facility, lots of heavy duty sorting equipment. I think we had 35 doors. So that would mean we'd have everything from vans to the big, huge double lorries. The big, in North America, we'd call them the semi-rigs, the really big ones. And lots of 24/7 operation, heavily unionized. I got this great opportunity and I was thrilled. I'd worked in the transportation industry already at that point for 17, 18 years and saw myself as being accomplished. And so I was very pleased to get this opportunity. And a couple of days before I took the position, my predecessor took me out for dinner. And we had this really nice dinner, but towards the end of the meal, he said, I got to tell you something. And we're just about to order coffee and dessert. And he says, this is the worst place I've ever worked in my life. Like the employees and the union absolutely hate the management and the management hates the employees. And it's just open warfare. The whole thing is messed up and it's open warfare. And initially I was a bit shocked, but I'd been so excited about the opportunity. And I thought to myself, wow, like it can't be that bad. Like it just can't be. And of course, I'm an optimist. So rose-colored glasses, I thought, I can handle it. Won't be a big deal. I got to tell you, it was everything and then some that he described to me. No one would look at me. No one would lift their head in the hallways and actually make eye contact with me, except for my management team, the management team that was there at the time. Probably because they had to, not because they wanted to. None of the unionized employees, none of the staff would talk to me, look at me. They ignored me, except for things like walking down the hall. There was one long hallway, and if you were walking down the hall, I remember in very particular the union president with his head down, walking, and under his breath as we passed, he said, "You won't last past 18 months." And he said it loud enough that I could hear it, but he never looked at me. He never addressed me. About week 3, I had a chair thrown at my office door. Week 5, I had received 26 grievances in one day. The union was having fun with me. And the rumor on the warehouse floor was if we could get her to 30 grievances, we could make her cry. And I didn't have the heart to tell anyone that I'd been crying all day in my office. Like I just didn't know what to do. And I I was really shocked. Like, these were really nice human beings. I knew that. I knew at the core that these were people. These were humans. These weren't monsters. These weren't machines. And I made a real commitment that I was going to spend whatever time I had there, I was going to spend understanding it. I wanted to understand what had happened to this amazing group of people that would make them so angry and bitter at their company and at their leadership team. I wanted to try to shift it and do anything I could to make human connection that was meaningful. And I started doing all kinds of really interesting things just to try to make connection. And I'm just going to share one. I won't share them all, but because there was a whole series of things that I did. But one of them was every single Friday, I would go in at 5 a.m. I'd make these huge pots, urns of coffee, and I would actually put some in a carafe, and I'd put it on a trolley, and I'd wheel it through the warehouse to every single door as they were finished loading their trucks, and offer them coffee. And way back then, we're talking, 25 years ago, 26, 27 years ago, there weren't a Starbucks on every corner or a Costa or, so people had to stop at the little convenience store and get a coffee, and nobody would take a coffee from me. I remember the first time I did it, I think I gave away one free coffee that Friday morning, but I made a commitment. I was going to do it every Friday morning for, I don't know, until I could get, and I'm telling you, it took probably 5 or 6 weeks. And then slowly but surely, one by one, these lovely gentlemen and women would lift their head, look me in the eye and say, coffee, free coffee. And then what happened is they got used to free coffee on Friday. So they wouldn't stop and pick up a coffee on their way to work. They would wait for the branch manager, the most senior person in the facility, to bring them a coffee.
Right.
And we started conversations. Sorry, I'm going to cry. We started conversations. We started to connect as humans. And for me, that was a journey. And when I left 3.5 years later, the relationships were fabulous. And I think we had one grievance the last year I was there, and it was quite a legitimate grievance. The supervisor had made a mistake. It was fine. And we dealt with it and rectified it. But, I learned so much through that experience. But one of the reasons I left was they'd sent me on this amazing leadership course. And this is the sort of the beginning of this story. And it was amazing. This course was just knocked my socks off. It was really, really good. And I'd never had that real opportunity. And when I came back, I was determined to use some of the things I'd learned. And I have the books there and I have the binders there. And I was, really following up with it. And about a month afterwards, the senior people that I reported to in Vancouver basically said, look, take that shit and throw it out. Excuse my language. That's not what we do here. And get down with it. And at that point, I knew I was with the wrong company. And I actually, by that point, I'd already worked for 3 or 4 different companies over the 25 years. And I knew there was something fundamentally wrong with what we were doing. And I never understood it. I never understood why people then, and some today still, believe that there is no requirement for human connection. There's no requirement for kindness and compassion and love in the workplace, that's not where it belongs. And I never understood that. And so it became my mission. I quit. I went back to school. I left the workplace. I went back to school. I did my master's. I got my CHRP in Canada. And so I did a few different things. I went to a college to get my HR certificate and my, account management stuff. And then I went back to uni to do my master's in leadership at Royal Roads. And that journey began. And I started Change Innovators. And I will say that I was really laughed at in the early days. When I would talk about compassion and kindness and love, you could imagine 23 years ago, I got absolutely, we don't need that stuff here. And so we had to do other things. We had to, I went and learned about health and safety and other HR things. We did a lot of other HR work in the first, other than I was developing our leadership stuff, but it wasn't our core way of making a living because we couldn't. Nobody wanted, and I wasn't going to just create another management course. I just wasn't going to do it because there was enough of those out there. So I plugged away, but we were making money doing other HR services at that time. And we grew real fast. I mean, we were very blessed. We grew really fast. At one point we had 15 or 16 full-time consultants and trainers. Do
you remember that first time you stood up in front of people and talked about love and compassion in the workplace?
Yeah, I can, I know, as soon as you say that, I put myself there. There was a lovely new hotel called Inn at the Forks in Winnipeg. So if anyone knows Winnipeg, Central Canada, and it's where where two rivers meet on First Nations land. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And, and it was brand new, like probably only a month old when I did an event there. And we had no problem getting people to come in, and and I was talking about leadership. There was a whole purpose of it, and I was really new with the business, and it was, I mean, the senior people rolled their eyes. They had this sort of, what are you talking about? Like, it was like a foreign. For me, it was like a natural state, but for most leaders in that room, it was a foreign conversation about why would we apply, in particular, compassion and love and kindness, that's not, and people would say things like, well, we're not a babysitting service, or we're not a nursery school, or we're not a, and I just thought, wow, like, this is just normal human, to me, it was what I always thought in terms of, instead of talking about what separates us, what binds us, what are the commonalities that all humans have. We have very common traits, regardless of race, religion, color of skin, what it is to be human. And we're lucky now. I've had the pleasure of watching science provide us, with things that weren't available 25 years ago. To understand, and our team, we're so lucky because our team is so well versed and continues constantly to upgrade themselves in neuroscience, psychology, really heart math, really understanding the heart-brain connection and coherence. And that elevation, I just spent, the last 2 days at a course. I spent the weekend in a different conference, learning more about coherence and, and harmonic resonance, and really understanding that when we're building an incredible community of people, when we're all on that same path, and it's not just about purpose, it's about connection, about human connection. But all of that was foreign 25 years ago. Nobody wanted to talk about it.
Yeah. You're just reminding me of, where was I 25 years ago? I mean, I'm thinking about that. And I was working for a very, very, well, no, before then even, I was working, no, more than 25 years ago. Goodness me, now I'm showing my age. But I was my first job was working for a really, really large engineering company. And I remember how people used to speak to each other. And I also remember the fear that there was in those environments. And, it just brings it back to me, the fear that exists. And then, I guess, I went down a different route. And, ultimately, in the end, we met, right?
Yeah.
But and we'll get to that. But, that fear, I do recognize that was there, and it shuts people down. It actually does shut people down. And right.
Yeah. And we now have a language for it, right? So now we understand really clearly, like when I think back to that, branch manager, big transportation operation. I mean, everything previous management had done was to rule by fear, intimidation. I'm the boss, do what you're told. And they hadn't had consistent, stable leadership for a long time. But what we didn't have a language for it 25 years ago, understanding that how fear really affects brain function, right? That autonomic nervous system, and how it affects how the messages to the brain from the heart affect the way, we get totally railroaded and hijacked, so the PFC goes offline, and the limbic system in the reptilian brain are firing. The people that I worked there, none of them were relaxed. They were on guard every moment of every day. They were on guard. And, I remember after I'd left, I got an email from the president of the union at the time, who had, really been adversarial. Like, it took us 2 years to really for him to start to believe that I actually wasn't going to turn on him, and that I actually wanted to collaborate with him. And I actually saw his value. Like, I saw him as a person, but I saw his value. And after I'd left, I got an email from him, and he said, I've decided to leave, and I've applied for the police force, and I'm wondering if you would, write a reference for me. And it was such a joy to write that reference. Like, it was such a meaningful joy to write that reference because he had taught me so much, and he was willing to lean in. And I think, the sad part is, and the reason he wanted to leave was that when I left, they went back to, to the old style, and he didn't want to do that anymore. He recognized his value, and that he didn't want to work in a place of fear. He didn't want to be ruled by fear and intimidation. And I think it's interesting, this concept, and I write about it in two of my books, this idea that, we've spent 130 years trying to treat human beings like they're machines. And interesting, in the age of AI, we're going to be working with machines and trying to get them to be more human-like. And, I'm just so thrilled. I mean, and I can see it's already happening, and so excited about the future. But, the beginnings were very, very humble, and very, we worked really hard for the first 10 years in order to, and I remember that very first version of New World Leadership. Talk about, how the evolution of our premier product, right? Like, it was, and some of our very first clients saying we wanted something different, and oh my gosh, this was so different. Like, we never expected to feel the way we feel when it was over, and connections that people were making, and it was a journey.
We've talked about this quite a bit, but I don't think I've ever really asked you this question, which is what makes doing this stuff in real time really interesting. But how did you? So we talked about you moved from the corporate world into essentially a human resources type of world, really, and then you did that for a while, and then you realized that leadership development was where you really wanted to be and wanted to take the company. So New World Leadership, talk to us a little bit about how you came to this idea of New World Leadership.
Yeah, so I'm going to do two things. One is, I just want to make a little correction. I always knew I wanted to be in leadership. Right. But you couldn't go from being in the transportation industry as a branch manager with 20 years experience, hang a shingle and say, I'm a leadership expert. Like, you just couldn't do it. And nobody wanted to talk to me about it. And back then you were doing management skills and attendance management and, discipline stuff.
Performance management.
And I'd gone to school to learn all that stuff and to get my CHRP and, to live in that world. And I don't want to make that world bad. It just wasn't, I struggled with it, right? Because I knew that those were things that were important when they were really important, but it shouldn't have been the core. So I always knew I wanted to work in leadership. But if no one will talk to you and you've started a business, then you have to make your way. So we did some recruitment. We did a lot of job analysis. We did a lot of occupational health and safety in the early days. And so I had this team of people that were amazing. I mean, we worked really closely together, and it was a great training ground for new HR people. So I ended up, part of the way that we generated revenue, I taught at two colleges. I taught at one college and two universities in their HR. So I got a lot of experience facilitating and being up in front of people. In New World Leadership, it really was. We'd had a couple of iterations of a leadership program that we'd taught, but it didn't have a name.
Right.
It didn't have a solid name. And this is literally like 18, 19 years ago. And I remember, and it's such a good question, because when I made the decision to call it New World Leadership, it was just an intuitive thing. It wasn't, there was no rational, and people that know me know that I really have a balanced, I really work hard. It's not natural, I work at it, to have a balance between heart and brain and intuition and gut. And I felt it at my soul level that this was the name of the course. And so we trademarked New World Leadership 17, 18 years ago.
Right.
And I remember the very first version of it. I remember what the binders looked like. You didn't do any online training, of course. Everything was big paper binders. And but if there was a challenge with it, because I had a couple of clients say, we won't work with you because of the name, because they felt there was a religious connection.
Mm-hmm.
And that was never dawned on me. I mean, and maybe that's my lack of, it was my lack of understanding of their religious beliefs, and it was never meant to offend anyone, of course. I mean, it just wouldn't be my thing, my style. But for me, it was about creating a new world. It was about creating a new way of leading. It was about creating a community of leaders globally. My little Winnipeg, startup. But I had big plans and I had big vision around, I didn't want people to go through what I saw. There was, 500 people in this plant went through, and they went through it over and over again, every iteration of every leader. And they weren't leaders. They were great managers, but they weren't leaders. And I didn't think that human beings should ever have to go through that we needed to truly connect with them. And so to me, New World was about creating that new space. It was creating the new world of leaders. It was creating a safe space for it to be okay to be a new world leader without any religious connotation at all. And now it's totally okay, but it was tough 18 years ago when we first.
So not only are you talking about love and compassion, you're talking about this new world and the new world of leadership. And, I kind of get this sense that you were at this kind of juxtaposition against the mainstream of where things were at that time, which is, I've done the courses in how to have difficult conversations with difficult people. And, then you get into, all these other
Can I
things.
tell a little story? Can I tell a little story?
Yeah.
Early days, we were probably 5 years old, and I got a call from a big manufacturing company out in rural Canada. And the woman said, well, could you come out and do a course on how to deal with difficult people? And I said, well, how many people do you have working there? 220. How many are difficult? It wasn't a language I used, right? It wasn't a language I used. And I thought, people aren't by nature difficult. This isn't, it's because the environment isn't safe, and because there isn't a place for optimal brain function and heart-centered connection and, all the things that we need to create high-performing teams. So I just remember that call, and I wasn't quite sure. I said, if you would like me to come out and work with your supervisors and your management team to help them sort of evaluate themselves and how they work with people, I'd be happy to do that. But I'm not going to come in. And we never did. We never have taught any courses on how to have difficult conversations.
No.
Never.
No.
Because if you're doing it right, if you're working on yourself, if you're following a new world leadership approach, there are no difficult conversations. You can say difficult things. You can say difficult things, but there's no difficult people or difficult conversations. There's just conversations.
And we often and then we talk about honesty and kindness, and how, and when you see people who are really unhappy about things, over the long term, that sometimes we just let that go, and we know that people are living and working at a suboptimal way of being, really, is how I put it. And yet the ability to lean into those kinds of conversations with genuine compassion and not lean into them as if there's some need to do performance management on somebody is a kind of key to this whole conversation. It's unkind to just allow people to carry on in that way, because they could, if they found the right place for themselves, be very joyful in what they're doing, right? But they get hooked.
Right.
So could we explore that a little bit?
Well, I think that the comment we use in our programming is that it's honesty. It used to be honesty before kindness always. That's where we start with leaders, right? And they kind of look at you like, what do you mean? Like, honesty before kindness always? Like, wow, that changes the whole culture, right? But then we switch it up and we spend a lot of time talking about intention. What is my true intention? Now, when you ask leaders, what is your true intention? You dig really deep, and you got to dig deep, because, oh, I have their best interest at heart. And I'm like, well, how do you know what the best interest is for another human being? I barely know what its best interest for me, let alone someone else, right?
Right.
So we really dig deep in these in these conversations around what is your true intention. And one of the examples I often use, and I think, I've written about it, is just, parents are really great. We're really great at observing ourselves as parents if we want to, and recognizing that, we often are pushing our own agenda on our children, because and if we do really hard work, like it's hard work to look in the mirror and say, I'll feel better if you get a university degree. That'll make me feel better. Now, we wrap it all up in, you'll have a better career and you'll be happier. But half the time that's just not true. And because people, can have amazing careers without university degrees. And sometimes, I've coached, my favorite example is coaching a lawyer who they phoned me up, big firm, and said, you got to work with this person. We don't know what's going on. And I remember saying, she was miserable. She was absolutely miserable. And I said, why did you become a lawyer? She said, my mom and dad are lawyers, and it was just expected. And I was just heartbroken. I was just heartbroken. So my goal was, she needed to decide she wanted to do something different. And my goal was just to help her transition. But, this stuff is really, so when we think in terms of honesty, it really is honesty with good intentions equals kindness. So if I really care about you and I really care about your success, whether it's staying with us or moving on, that's irrelevant. What really matters is if I care about you and your happiness and your performance and your, the fact that we know that humans want to perform well. We're not born saying, oh, today I'm going to go to work and make everyone's life miserable. We know that's not the human condition. It can be if that's how that's your life experience, but we're not born that way. So getting people to really do that work and understanding and evaluating in every single situation. So honesty is really incredible. And I'll often ask executives, are you guys really honest with each other? And their first response is always, oh, absolutely. We're really honest with each other. And then I say, so you never leave a meeting with something in your head that really matters to you that you haven't spoken. And, they know that often they're not being truly honest with each other. So it's doing that practice and understanding the components of it.
Yeah. I think what you're again talking about, from my point of view at least, is we've talked about this before, is that is New World leadership a philosophy? Is it a course? Is it something tangible versus something kind of ethereal? So maybe we could explore that just for a little bit. What New World leadership, then, when we're talking about these ideas of kindness, about honesty, how do you capture the essence of this stuff and make it into something tangible that makes it a massive impact and a real difference in people's lives?
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Can we start there in episode 2?
We can.
Because I can see that we've been 28 minutes, and I actually think that that's a fabulous place to start for episode 2. Would that work for you?
Absolutely. That was the whole point, to start the conversation.
Yeah.
So, Yvonne.
The story behind the story.
We have, completed first episode of the story behind the story. And I would just like to say thank you for this. We work together. We're very close in the work that we do, but we've been wanting to do this for a while. We've also got some other fabulous podcasts that we've also got on our website that we do together to try and explore these things. This one is very close to our heart. So thank you. And thank you to those who tuned in. Thank you to those who watch this when we put it onto our YouTube channel. Any final reflections from you, Yvonne?
No, it was so much fun. Much fun. It's been a while since I've talked about the history of the company and how we got started. And so it was really, really fun. So thanks for creating the space to do it.
Brilliant. Okay. So we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.